Hey guys, it's Lindy.
And it's Mike here, and this is TIY.
The Tiny It Yourself channel, and today we are going to talk about how we did our cedar siding.
Yep, we're going to show you the process from staining or finishing so that it can handle the weather, all the way up into installation and everything. We're going to show you the whole thing, little hurdles that we came over, stuff like that.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so let's talk about the basics of tongue and groove siding really quick. So these are 1x6 cedar boards. All these principles pretty much are gonna work for doing pine tongue and groove inside. But we have really a 5 1/4-ish piece of wood here, and there's only 5 inches of exposed face on the front once the tongue is inside the groove. And so when you're figuring out how much you need to buy, you have to take that into account. See what I'm talking about? And another very obvious point, and I'm sure somebody has done it wrong, but in terms of which way water flows, you want to make sure the tongue is facing up, and that way the water won't come in. Imagine if it was like that, the water would just go whip right into that crack and then rot your wood out. And in terms of tools and cuts, I'm going to be doing about 95% of my cuts on the chop saw, just in terms of cutting them to length. But when I'm going over a window or something, I might need to do a lengthwise cut, and I'm going to be doing it on a table saw. Both of these can be done on a circular saw, it's just less precise. And in terms of anchoring, if you're just approaching this for the first time and maybe you saw the trim video and you're thinking like in terms of trim, you might think, oh, I'll just pop a couple screws right on the front right there. No, that is not the best way to do that. I have seen people do that, but you want to be coming in on the tongue downward at an angle onto a stud. Most people with their wooden studs can simply take an air nailer and come in down here right on that tongue and pop into their studs. But since we're doing metal studs, we're going to be doing these screws, and we're going to be doing these trim screws, which have a T10 star bit. I wouldn't want to go any larger than that because it will definitely split this. There's already a potential to split. And when I first started doing it, I did split a few, but then I got it under control, and you just got to make sure you get a sharper angle than you initially would think. So if you're looking inside the wall, it's going to look about like that, and so you're not going to see the screw head at all, which is just way better in terms of moisture. And we're going to get started here in a second, but one last point, our section of wood on this wall was small enough that I could just fit straight 10-inch boards, but a lot of people are going to have to be splicing the boards for longer distances, and when you're doing that, make sure to cut at a 45-degree angle when you're joining them so that water can't get through as easily, and then, you know, take into account that extra 3/4 of an inch length that you're gonna lose. Also, really quickly, can we talk about how satisfying this is? This piece that was split does this stringy thing, and it's really fun. Okay, so it's really windy, so I'll make this quick, but this is my staining setup. Again, I am using the Minwax Hellman spar urethane, which is supposed to be good for expansion and contraction. And our cedar trim video is basically a how to stain the cedar video for the first part of it, so I won't go in too much detail here. But since that video, in terms of efficiency, I figured that it's way better to actually start with the rough side up, so you can get a layer on that and then flip it over, and then you have your first layer on both sides. And then again, we want to do 3 layers on the finished side and 2 layers on the back side. So technically, if you wanted to be really efficient, you could just do this process twice and then do the 3rd coat on the outside when it is actually on the building. That way you can go from unfinished boards to installed boards pretty quickly. Okay, so now I've flipped all of them and I'm ready to do the nicer side. And another thing that I learned about this spar urethane is that whenever you have some rough patches like that right there, it's way better to deal with them now and sand them, otherwise they can be exaggerated by the finish. And here are the details for the sort of finishing schedule, you know, what sandpaper and stuff like that. And you can pause if you need to read that, but for now, let's move on. Okay, so here I am on the back side of our house. The way we're doing it is metal, wood, and metal again. We've already done one of the strips of metal. We're doing the wood in the middle because we have a pretty intense weight limit, and so we're trying to keep it as light as possible. And I also like the idea of having all of the weight from the wood directly over the wheels. And then we are going to do another metal over there, and the metal is going to be in a future video, so stay tuned for that. So in other words, we're just going to be doing this vertical strip, and as you can see, everything is flashed out and trimmed out and ready for the siding. Except there's a little bit of trim I need to do on the top right there. We also have these metal trim pieces that have to go in first, I also flashed out the top of this window, which is kind of hard to see, and then I used some extra window flashing tape on top of the trim there. And as you can see, I didn't go out all the way to the edge because the siding is considerably thinner than the trim, and this way we won't have a weird flashy, shiny strip. We also have our drip edge on there, which is galvanized metal, and this is what it looks like from the side, and it's really a no-brainer to put in. You just got to make sure it goes under the house wrap, and even if you had the house wrap on, you can just kind of undo the bottom, slide it in, and put it back on. That's what we did. In terms of setup and tools, I've got a little bit of a workstation here. I got this chop saw at the local big box store for about $100, and this helmet was the best purchase I've ever made. It was $2 at a local farm auction, and I thought it was just headphones in a box, and I got it, and it was the whole setup, and it's eye protection and head protection and ear protection, and those just kind of snap into your ears. They're great. I highly suggest one. Okay, so what I found the best thing to do first is to mark out your stud lines so that you can screw into those, and I simply did that by finding where the stud was, you know, looking inside and finding a point to measure from, you know, from a corner of a window or whatever, and then I used just a level to create the mark, and then I went all the way across and got all of my lines so it's ready to go. Okay, so this is where we're going to put our first board. I'm simply going to measure it and cut it to that angle like I would any other board. All right, got the measurement, time to cut. Okay, so here's the current situation. I'm getting a slight gap from that flashing, but once I caulk that, it should be virtually invisible. And no, this will not matter because this edge will be completely covered. Okay, now it's time to start screwing it in, and I'm gonna explain this technique in further detail in a little bit. And then just on this bottom piece, because there's no tongue below it for it to hook onto, I have to do some exposed screws, which sucks. And then I'm also just using this chisel to control the exact elevation of it so it matches my other siding and that this is level. I don't know what just happened, but everything looks like it worked out. All right, I threw some more of those in and matched them to the studs, and I am going to put some caulking over them at some point. Okay, here's a good little learning experience. I always try and go 3 inches in for the last screw at least, but since there was that little knot there and I wanted this to be really tight, and I was like, I'm gonna try and just pushing it there on the end, and it just obviously split. And so if you ever have a sketchy situation like that, you can always pre-drill, you know, occasionally. It's not that big of a deal. But it is holding it in there, and as I put the next one on, I'll just crank it so that it pushes that back into place, and then I'll caulk it at the end. All right, next board, I'm gonna go ahead and do a crazy one. I just marked it out because I'm trying to get some variation going on, and I have a lot of crazy boards left, so I'm gonna pop one in right now. Got my trusty block here. That right there is the goal. So the beveled edge meets the beveled edge, and now you can't see that crack that was there at all. Okay, so I popped all the top screws on, and thankfully, of course, we do not have to do any screws on the bottom because the tongue on the one below it just catches it and holds it in place. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm just gonna call it a day and come back and finish it later. All right, it's another day and it's super nice out, and for this next piece I'm running into a little bit of an issue or just a little challenge that happens when you hit trim, and that is if I were to just keep on going straight, it would just hit it, and so I have to cut out a notch, and it's about a 1/2 inch sliver that I'm gonna cut out on the table saw going forward so that this next piece is gonna fit right onto this trim. All right, I've got my table saw here ready to eat away about a 1/2 inch strip on the bottom of the board, and in case you're wondering, it's a Craftsman Evolve. It's really good deal. It's like $130 online, and it's been great so far. So let's do this. All right, so I just cut the strip and ended it at the point where the diagonal starts, and so I'm gonna go and finish the rest with a Japanese saw. Whatever. Looks great. All right, now we're gonna see how well it fits. Wasn't super tight, so I'm just gonna shave a little bit off so you can see I kind of marked it in pencil, and then we'll see what happens. All right, now that that piece is on, it's about as good as it's going to get. There's a little gap, but I'll caulk that and it won't be noticeable. Now, as I go upward, it's really important for me to keep it level, and it's easy on each one to maybe go 1/8 of an inch higher on one side accidentally, and it can get pretty far off. And there's a lot of ways to do this. I could just be measuring down from this guy. I could do a horizontal level line, but for now I've just marked 2-inch lines as reference points on each side to follow as I go up, and that way I'll be perfectly level when I hit this. And here's sort of an exaggerated example of what I'm talking about. On one side, you can be almost down with no gap at all, and then on the other side, you might have a pretty big gap there. But it doesn't actually look that different from straight on. All right, so things are coming along pretty nicely. As you'll see, I just have this gap here, which happens to be just a normal piece with the tongue on the top cut off, but because we're not going to be able to sort of wedge it in onto the tongue with this trim here, I'm gonna have to cut that cutout at an angle down as well so that it doesn't get caught on that corner and it can kind of just be plopped in and into the groove at the same time. And that's gonna end right here. I'm gonna leave the tongue on the edges, and awesomely, all of the little pieces of scrap I have are longer than this gap, so they're gonna work. And here is a better perspective on the progress. We're maybe like 1/3 of the way up, not even, but I think those little sides of the window are gonna go pretty quickly. And another project that I'm working on, which is pretty fun, and stay tuned for it, is making a 3D printed adapter for a downspout there. And then we think we're gonna do rain chains, which are cool, so that they're gonna be easily removable and you can travel with them and they'll look nice. Okay, so here is the cut. That's the outside. Of course, a bird pooped on it. A bird's pooped on like half my boards. And then we've got a slight angle there. It might be kind of hard to see on camera. And then the notch there. It was a little bit difficult, just had to angle the table saw, cut out a little notch for the table saw blade to go in and start, and then just go down. Little moment of truth situation here. So I'm gonna come in kind of like at an angle like this. I think my angle was a little too minor. I could do it, it might just be sketchy. All right, I simply dulled the edge that it would catch on with a chisel really quickly, and I'm actually being brave enough to just finish it off and try it. And I already put stain on it because I'm feeling risky. The worst thing that can happen is that the tongue on the other one just snaps off. I paused it because it was taking forever, but I got it in and it's a super tight fit and nothing snapped off, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. Just gonna screw it in, and sadly I'm gonna have to have exposed screws right there because there's no tongue to catch it. But I'll caulk them up as usual. So tight. I don't know if we can appreciate this because there's a bevel there, but there's literally no gap. All right, so we've made it to the top of the window on both sides, and in case you didn't notice, I have put flashing tape there instead of the flashing I had before. The flashing I had before was this sort of homemade piece of over window trim flashing, which I did out of some extra aluminum flashing and this hand seamer here, but it wasn't really laying flat and it was kind of uneven because it was done by hand, and so I just decided to go with the tape. Ow, really sharp. But now, as you can pretty easily tell by where this ends, we're gonna have to do sort of the opposite of what we did on the bottom of the window and just notch out a bottom chunk here. Thankfully, it doesn't have to be at an angle or anything like that because it's just gonna go downward onto this tongue. Okay, it was super nice and all of a sudden it's gonna rain, so I'm calling it a day, but this is the piece I just cut. As you can see, it has this notch taken out all the way down to the other end, and that'll just fit on either side of the window, hopefully. All right, I'm ready to put this guy up there. I hope that everything magically fits, but something tells me there's gonna be something wrong. So I hammer one side tight and the other side loosens a little bit, and I hammer that side and the other side loosens. But I'm just gonna go ahead and screw them in, and I think it'll just even out. Okay, so the one right above the windows is about as good as it's gonna get. It's all screwed in. So I'm just gonna go and do 3 more, which are pretty straightforward, and I'll throw on a time lapse real quick for that. Okay, so here I am up on the scaffolding, and I've just got 2 pieces and some slivers to do on this side. And of course this last piece of trim, which I'm gonna do in a second. Okay, now that I have this last piece of trim up and this board, I can determine that the base of the valley trim here is gonna be about 1 inch into that board. So I'm going to cut out a notch, the shape of the valley. And in order to slide it in, I am also going to have to cut it at an angle in the back and wedge it just like that board below the window. So hopefully you can see what's going on. It's pretty subtle, but I made this cut on the Japanese saw. It's really just a V that also is angled that way a little bit. And it ends about 1 foot down on each side. So I'm gonna go ahead and try and put it in. Okay, so this is gonna be a bit of a gamble, but we're gonna see if it fits. Needs to be hammered in at the same time that it gets pushed back. All right, I was able to pop it in. The camera actually ran out of space, but it's in there, and I'm gonna have to go ahead and screw it in and do maybe an exposed screw here, but not too close to the drip line in the center. And for a better perspective, this is the current situation. Super close to being done. All right, so I cut this piece with the Japanese saw, and the next step is gonna be removing this back groove. And I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of an experiment and leave a bit of the back groove here, so that I don't have to put a screw through here and risk splitting it. But normally I would suggest just taking the whole back off. Okay, so removing the back part of the groove could be done a few ways. Just a table saw rip would be really easy, just setting your blade to like 1/4 of an inch and about 3/8 inch over, and then just shredding the back of it. But since this is such a short piece, I am just chiseling it off along a line that's about 3/8 of an inch from the back, because that's how deep the groove goes. And this is pretty easy. Just like that. Okay, now that I finished the chiseling, you can really see what we're trying to do here. See how you can just pop that on the top, pretty obvious. But I'm also gonna try this situation here where I've got just a little bit of the groove left on the end, and we're gonna hopefully be able to wedge it in. And we'll see, it might just break. And as usual, I'm going to make sure that all surfaces are stained, so I'm going to go ahead and stain the part of the groove that I just knocked off, and of course the ends and everything that I just cut. Another somewhat obvious thing, but I think it's good to mention, if you have to cut out a lot of these, you don't have to go ahead and measure what your angle is every time. You can simply take this and scribe your angle onto the piece you need to cut. All right, moment of truth on whether or not keeping a little bit of a groove was a good idea, if it will fit or not. All right. Ah, yes, it worked. Haha. Sadly, I still have to do at least one exposed nail here. Screw. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and put this one on from the roof, but just to mention one quick strategy, I could simply take that little piece of trim off and then slide in with the full groove on, but I don't like the idea of putting that trim on and taking it off and sort of loosening up the screw holes and the wood that is holding the screw holes in. So let's go for it. Bumblebee.
We hope you learned something on this video. Stay tuned for our next video, which will be about how we did our metal siding in conjunction with our cedar siding.
Yep, hope you guys learned some stuff. Had a good time putting on the siding. All right, so follow us on Instagram and keep watching, and thanks for watching.
If you're gonna tell us that we did everything wrong, then you can leave your comments in the trash.
Yep.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.